Just a warning that on this episode, the sound is not as consistent as we would like. We had some issues in the recording room and are working on it for next time.
Welcome to Everything Life Coaching. I'm John Kim.
And I'm Noelle Cordeau. We are the founders of Lumia.
And we're super passionate about all things coaching, and we want to share what we've learned from over a decade of coaching and training thousands of life coaches.
Let's dive into the science and magic of coaching.
Hello, and welcome to Everything Life Coaching. This is Noelle here, and today we have a really special guest with us, Jen Ammenti. How are you?
Oh, I'm doing well, Noelle. It's so great to be here. Thanks for having me.
Absolutely. We've been doing a series highlighting our Lumia instructors and students, and you are both of those things. And so I'm tickled to have you on, and I'm excited about our conversation today. We're going to tackle a topic that is really current and top of mind for a lot of folks, and that is unconscious bias and how it works in coach training, how it works for coaches, and what folks need to think about with this particular aspect of our discipline. But before we dive in, can you give us a primer? Please tell us who you are and what you do as a coach. We want to know you as a human.
Awesome. Well, I guess I would say that I'm a work in progress. I am an educator at heart and have spent a good portion of my adult life teaching in K-12 and working with adults as well in educational spaces. I also identify as an anti-racist, so I am always working to both disrupt racism internally as well as externally. This I think shows up in my business. I'm very inspired by nature. I'm a creator. I like to collage and watercolor and make costumes and dance and hike and swim. And, all of those things kind of feed into how I think I see my business, which is called The Unwound Mind. And I am a coach and consultant in mostly educational spaces, working with leaders, teacher leaders, school administrators, district leaders, instructional coaches, and as well as nonprofit leaders in educational spaces. And in that work, I'm really working to support them with changing practices, growing practices and behaviors, disrupting systems, creating new systems that are all in service of learning, growth and development, and inclusion,
Awesome.
And are hopefully reaching all the way down to students.
Awesome. I love this. And I've loved following your coaching journey through all of these spaces. I know you also happen to be a dog mom.
Yes, I am.
And you have been living and flourishing in New Orleans, which I'm so jealous of. I am excited to either dog sit for you or come visit.
Yes, this is a very special place, and I was welcomed in with open arms about 1.5 years ago. So I'm very lucky to be here.
Awesome. And you've also been an instructor for Lumia, and supported in the classroom experience of unconscious bias, which we're so grateful to have had you working with our students. Can you tell us a little bit about your experience approaching the topic of unconscious bias with adult learners?
Absolutely. The course that I've taught for Lumia followed the unconscious bias course. So it was a place of kind of processing after having sat through that course with Kari. And we're very supported by the ICF Code of Ethics, which also helps us kind of dig into this topic in a way that holds us accountable to the work. And I think that, through that course, a lot of what comes up is like, how do I even get there? If it's unconscious, how do I find it? which is a very valid question. And I think part of it that I've learned, at least through my own experience, just as an educator and now as a coach as well, and just a human in the world, is that our bodies and our minds are always giving us signals about things that are living within us and kind of lifting them up to say, like, hey, this might need to be checked to see if it's in alignment with your beliefs. And so unconscious bias, in order for it to become a, conscious thing that we can look at and name and examine and determine, how it is impacting our relationships and our work and all the things, we have to really be tuned into the signals that our bodies are sending us. We have to be tuned into the thought patterns that arise. I typically feel like whenever any sort of judgment or assumption arises for me, that's usually a red flag that I am getting into a space of unconscious bias. And so for me, that's, time to slow down, time to maybe not say something out loud right now and actually examine what's coming up for me. But those are two ways that I think that the body signals to, or the mind signals to us. The body can do it in different ways as well. We might get, we might say something and then immediately feel really uncomfortable about something that we said. Like it might sit in the belly or, make us have those butterflies of nausea. And that can be a signal that, like, oh, I just said something that didn't sit right with me. What's that about? So it's really a practice of curiosity, I think, in a lot of ways.
Thank you so much for those definitions and cues that we can use to understand this space. When I've talked about unconscious bias with our students, I've used an example. I live in Philadelphia by many college campuses, University of Pennsylvania, Drexel, Temple, and say I saw a man walking down the street and he's very disheveled, carrying a briefcase that has just papers overflowing from it. There's many halfway houses in the area. There's a bus stop by my house. So I've asked students to think about, how this person might present. And then the reframe that I've kind of leaned into is, well, is there a chance that this human is a astrophysicist at the University of Pennsylvania who's coming home from a late class? Aside from observing humans and making judgments about them, what are other ways that unconscious bias can really impact and limit our ability to take in information and find and see the world accurately?
Yes, thank you for that. I mean, I think I see this a lot happening. I mean, I saw it in my own practice as a classroom teacher, and I see it a lot in schools where, we make all of these decisions about, whether or not a student is motivated to learn, or if they are, maybe that they're a challenge or behaviorally. And so there's like these ways in which things are happening, and we're making decisions about an environment, like how to set up an environment, or how to hold the space of an environment that comes from a place of our kind of like own experiences, our own ways of being, or the things that worked for us. And we're not actually thinking about what are the needs of the people around us or the people before us that we are responsible for in those moments. So I think about that as being kind of another way that unconscious bias can show up. I think it can show up in like our decisions that we're making all the time, right? Like our brains are making, I don't know the number, but you probably do. It's a lot of decisions every minute, every second. And a lot of those are happening kind of behind the scenes, right? We're just doing. trying to think, like, what are some other ways that unconscious bias might show up?
Yeah, I love the classroom example. And I can speak a little bit about the brain.
Yeah, thank you.
And what I think happens, because we take in so many bits of information and so much data at one time, but our brains can't process all of it. And typically what happens with our brains is that our brains are lazy, and our brains utilize something called the availability heuristic. And the availability heuristic is basically a shortcut where our brain will, instead of looking at the full data set in front of us, it will revert back to a singular piece of information that we have been privy to previously. So if I have a really strong memory of having a horrible taste in my mouth after eating broccoli as a kid, if I see broccoli, I might directly just go be like, oh, that's gross. It tastes bad. It can't possibly be delicious, and stick with, that perspective of a given thing. When as an adult, I have a lot more data sets available to me. So for example, has this been sauteed in garlic and butter? Is it coming from a 5-star restaurant? Has it been nice and charred and crispy fried? That would give me an opportunity to reevaluate broccoli on different terms. So that's kind of how it works from a memory-based perspective. And humans are taught to go on autopilot. And another really powerful thing that happens with humans is that, we're born into whatever family of origin we happen to be born into, whatever community we happen to be born into, whatever school system we happen to grow up in, and our regional, geographic, and familial situation is what teaches us about the world. So from a very real perspective, the different groups that we're a part of inform the way that we think and see and assess the world, more so than from the perspective of our own agency as adults, being curious about what we might see differently if we actually thought for ourselves. So when we kicked off, you said something really interesting. And I'll give a primer on my question with the 1-2 punch. You said, I identify as an anti-racist. And for me, that was so powerful because with identity, I typically, I haven't really thought of anti-racism from a perspective of an identity that I could embody. And as I've been really working and thinking about and playing with ideas in the anti-racism space, really specifically in support of DEI teams, one of the things that's become really apparent to me is that both cultural competency and getting familiar with bias and unconscious bias is actually a precursor to being able to truly engage in anti-racist work or diversity, equity, and inclusion. I'd love your perspective on that. And then the second part of my question is, from a really human perspective, what was your tipping point? I know a little bit about your story, that working in schools and seeing inequality sparked a lot of this for you, but what happened for you to set you off on this path?
Thank you for that. I would say that, if we were to kind of think back to my tipping point, it definitely was in the classroom. I also identify as a white woman, and, there's all kinds of things that come along with that identity in educational spaces. But I was responsible for teaching mostly students of color at the time. And it started off by just like realizing how little I knew about just the history of people of color in our country. That was really the very beginning for me. And so for a long time, it was about learning. learning about others' experiences, learning history. And then it started to shift into actually taking a look at myself and understanding that I too had a racial identity as a white person. And as I kind of got into that exploration, and there's all kinds of layers of discomfort and growth and learning, and I feel like I'm going to be in this learning for my whole life. But as I, kind of shifted the focus from being external to being more internal and looking at myself and looking at the ways in which I was actually complicit in the things that I wanted to be disrupting or pushing back against, and kind of grappling with that. I think that that's really where my work towards becoming an anti-racist, or striving to be an anti-racist, however you want to say that, really took hold. Because anti-racism is really about actually opposing racism, right? And acknowledging that it exists in all kinds of spaces, and internally. And so, that work has been a lot about looking at myself and looking at my own, and this ties back to the unconscious bias, like looking at the beliefs and looking at the thoughts that pop up, and looking at the things that I might say on a snap in a snap moment, in a reactive way. Look at my behaviors in that are reactive. And a lot of my learning from this has come from Resmaa Menakem, and his work is really situated in somatics and in the body, and tuning into ourselves and our own stories, and using those as our place of healing to move forward in this work.
Awesome. And so, first of all, I just want to say thank you, because you just described the journey that we ask our coaches to go on. And the why behind this is when you're a coach, you work with humans, other humans, and from a bias-based perspective, from an intersectionality perspective, racism is probably the big one that we're grappling with in our time, especially in the US. And also intersectionality splays out across the board, everything from ableism to immigrant bias to height bias to if someone has a tone of voice that's pleasing or not pleasing. And so we ask coaches to confront themselves in the process of coach training, to start asking these questions. If you're thinking about how long you've been on this journey and how uncomfortable it can be for folks when they're especially first digging in, what do you think the most important things for people to remember are when they're just starting to say, oh boy, this is some stuff?
Yeah, I think it's really giving yourself a lot of grace and patience. And what you really want to be able to do is to get comfortable sitting in discomfort, because the discomfort, in my experience, does not ever go away. I just become better at navigating it, and being able to stay in my body and respond, and versus react when I am activated. I think that it can feel scary. It can feel, it disrupts so much of, what we've thought for so long about ourselves. And I think that's a big one, right? Like we want to see ourselves as good people. And then we start to notice these things that, potentially we've done to cause harm, and, or that have caused harm, even if it wasn't our intention, it was the impact of it. And we have to sit with it. We have to navigate it. And it's so important that we don't get stuck in that space, that we can move through that to the space of like connecting and changing behaviors, changing beliefs. Yeah, I mean, I just feel like I could say so much, and I'm not sure where to go really, but it is, I think, the most important work that we can be doing as coaches. I also think, from a perspective of a white person, it is the absolute most important work that I can be doing in order to show up in community and in connection with others. And for other white people engaging in this work, I think the biggest thing I can say is find other white people who can have these conversations with you and who can do this work with you, so that when you are engaging with folks of color, you are engaging from a place of your own work, and that you're not asking them to do the work for you.
Amen. Amen. And, what I really loved about the way that you presented this perspective is that it's so hopeful, is that there is a path to move from awareness and discomfort stemming from that awareness towards behavioral change, towards belief system change. And as coaches, one of the fundamental things that we know is that as human beings, we are inherently capable of change. And so, taking our own medicine at the individual, interpersonal, internal level and saying, all right, what is my change process is what's required of us through the code of ethics to be able to participate in true human services. There's a piece of this that I'm really curious about that I think you can shed light on. And that's the somatic piece. I'm someone who lives in my head. My brain is what I use day in and day out. And I know that I approach things often from a very intellectual perspective, but I know that our bodies hold so much knowledge as well, and that our hearts give us just as many messages, if not more, than our brains. And if in this space, especially, acknowledging that we have a body, that we live in our body, that our body is experiencing this, seems really important.
Yes, absolutely. I want to tack something back on as well to that, the previous thing I was speaking about. And I just want to also say that this work is not linear, right? It is, we learn something, we practice, we put it into action, and then something else happens where we deepen we hit another challenge, we hit another knot, and we have to, focus in on it. And then we kind of start that cycle all over again. So I really like to just remind folks that we're not going to get to a place of feeling done, right? We never kind of arrive at that finished place. That every lesson that we learn inherently leads us to the next lesson. So I just wanted to add that. But the somatic piece has been so huge for me. It really, I guess it was the beginning of the pandemic. Early on, at least, it was September 2020. I started taking a somatics awareness class with a group called Trauma Literacy. Thank you, Carly and Anouk. You both were amazing. And they were really helping. I had just finished reading Resma's book, My Grandmother's Hands. And so I was really starting to think about how trauma lives in the body, and, how to really tune into all the wisdom that's there, right? And this is another kind of, I guess, wing of white supremacy, is that we've been taught not to listen to our bodies. These are indigenous practices. They come from very old ways of being. And we've been taught not to listen, that our bodies are not a source of wisdom, and we've been cut off from them in that way. And so for me, a lot of this has been, really coming home to myself and my body, and really paying attention to, what is that lump in my throat telling me? Why does my face feel really flushed right now? And I think the biggest learning has been that all those little signs eventually lead to my survival pattern or my stress response, however you want to, my activation, however you want to call it, of, I have a tendency, if we were thinking about fight, flight, freeze, I will freeze and then I will completely disassociate. And so a huge part of this healing for me and this learning for me has been about learning how to come back when I've gone off somewhere else because my body's either perceived a threat or I've experienced a threat. And I'm still learning this, of course, but there's been a few times where I've been in a patterned experience. And I've noticed in the moment, like, oh, I can feel my activation right now. Like my heart is starting to beat fast. I can feel that lump. And I can ask myself now, what do I need? And it might be something as simple as leaning back in a chair and letting the chair support me if I'm forward. Or it might be sitting down if I'm standing up, taking some deep breaths and then giving myself the space to ask, what do I want to do differently right now? And from that, being able to try something new because I'm not reacting from my patterns. I'm actually thinking about what could I try right now that might lead me to a different result. And I've also noticed that after these experiences that I have, I need to fully move and shake my body, just like our doggies do.
Yes.
And so whether that's like turning on my favorite song to dance to, or it is literally just shaking out my body from my wrists to my ankles, to, my hips, like all the things to release that energy.
Yes. Something that I do, that has really been working for me recently is, not minimizing any kind of pain that comes from discomfort by just, acknowledging it and honestly thanking it for its message. And I take a meditative walk where I really tune into my senses and I force myself to smell.
So good.
And to name colors and to feel the heat of the summer outside or the breeze on my skin. What does it feel like my feet to be hitting the pavement in my hot pink Crocs as I roll around Philadelphia? And that rubbery feeling. And that bodily activation and that focus gives my limbic system and my reptilian brain that's like, a chance to go offline and for my body to take over. And that I did that last night. I took one of those walks last night. It was beautiful out.
It brings you present, right? Like it's presencing, it's getting in the moment.
It does.
Love that so much. I'm going to try it. I'm going to do it tomorrow morning when I walk the dog.
Yeah, and if you want to add a little extra spice to it, and get some good positivity resonance going, you can tack on a little bit of loving kindness. And every living thing that you see, whether it's a squirrel or a dog or a human or a plant, wish it well and wish it the capacity to live till its fullest extent. And it's a game changer.
Yeah, it's beautiful.
I was rolling around New York once and I was doing that and I totally forgot that I was supposed to be in my head and I was just saying to people on the sidewalk, I love you. But hey, it was not the worst thing that can happen.
You're up with yourself, Noelle.
Right. And it's conversations like this that make me feel so humbled to be a part of our Lumia community because, these are the conversations that we get to have in our classrooms without shame, to really level with each other on a human level and say, hey, we're all here because we want to learn how to do this. We're all here because we want to deepen our skills and increase our capacity to engage with humanity in a non-judgmental way. What was it like for you to be in our Lumia classrooms as a student and an instructor?
Wow. Well, I'm currently a student because I'm in the signature program. So
Yay!
I get to be a student again. And yeah, it's really nice to be back in the learning space. I feel like I'm making all these shifts and changes to my coaching practice for the first time in a long time that just feel really resonant and really good. So I love that about Lumia. I feel like Lumia always gives me these kind of like actionable things that I am just like, ooh, yes, that, and I'm doing it. And I can just like put it right in. So that is always really fun. And then as a teacher, I mean, I guess what I really loved, the course that I was teaching was looking at the code of ethics and then talking about goal setting and how we set goals for ourselves and how we help others set goals. And it was just really nice to connect with students who are really open to the learning. And, they've chosen to be there, right? This is something that they're seeking out for themselves. So there's an investment, and the questions are always really rich. And it's just really fun to be in that kind of back and forth and hear all the diversity of thoughts and experiences that people are bringing from all different professions and walks of life. And and just like bringing all of that into the space. And I felt that as a student as well.
That's awesome. The diversity in our community is extraordinary, just extraordinary. And one of the things that I love is that there is so much to learn from every single person in our community that I learn so much. I think you and I are a great example. Every instructor is a great example that as soon as I bump into you, I'm like, oh my, holy shit. Like there's another mind here that I need to like get to know because this is great. Like, it is a wellspring of collective knowledge. It's good stuff. So I know folks who are listening, often approach coaching with trepidation and kind of saying like, oh, you both are talking about where you are on this journey from a pretty high level practitioner perspective. What advice would you give to aspiring coaches, people who are circling, wondering if this is the right thing to dive into?
Yeah. I would say keep deep diving on yourself and getting to know yourself really, really deeply in all the different facets that you can. I would say practice, have these conversations with other coaches as much as possible. Practice your coaching skills. I think I would also say, and somebody shared this with me when I was starting my business as a coach. They said, getting a business off the ground takes 3 to 5 years. So hang in there. And I tell you, when I hit the 3-year mark, I was like, they were right. They were so
awesome.
Right. The first three years for me were, I constantly was like, have I made the right choice? Am I doing the right thing? I was having to work a lot of other jobs and things to kind of keep this going. And it takes time to grow something, and it doesn't happen overnight. So hang in there.
You're right. You're right. You're absolutely right. And I think that's a really realistic way to look at it. I always tell folks, you're going to need a solid year of learning how to coach, and then you'll need another solid year of getting started. And then after that, there's the crescendo build.
Yeah.
100%. Absolutely. All right. So given that you are at the 3-year mark with your beautiful business, where can folks find you?
You can find me at theunwoundmind.com. You can also, I have a very poor social media presence. I'm working on that. That's a work in progress. So you could find me the same way, but it hasn't been updated in a very long time. I'll put it that way.
Yeah.
theunwoundmind.com. And there is a link there as well for I think it's like a free 30-minute intro conversation. There's nothing attached. You can, if you're a Lumia coach, I extended this when I was teaching. You are more than welcome to take up that time and pick my brain or just, connect in some way about coaching. I'm happy to do that. So feel free to use that link for that. There's no further commitment needed. But yeah, please check out my website. Also, a work in progress, and I'm working on updating it as well because my offerings are changing all the time. But yeah, I would love to connect with folks. You can also reach me at jen@theunwoundmind.com if you want to email me directly.
Excellent. That's super generous of you. Thank you. Jen, it has been such a pleasure hanging out today. Thank you for your time. Thank you for bringing your perspective, and we will do this again soon.
Thank you so much, Noelle. It's been such a pleasure to be here with you.
You bet.
Thanks for listening to Everything Life Coaching. If you're feeling the draw to become a coach, head to lumiacoaching.com/everything. Explore a new career that brings fulfillment, gives you a true sense of purpose, and a bold community to do it with.
Lumia is ready to equip you with the tools, training, and community you will need to reach your goals. If you're ready to build a unique coaching business on your own terms while making an impact on the world at large, Lumia is the next bold step in your coaching journey. That's lumiacoaching.com/everything.
And hey, if you're waiting for a sign, this is it.